they've been not so good. And I think obviously the problem is the offense. They can't score. They can't move the ball. And the big problem is the offensive line. Until Cal gets an offensive line, they're going to be stuck in this middle of the pack at best. They have pretty good skill position players. The quarterback is not elite enough to challenge for a conference championship or anything like that, but he's good enough to compete in most games. Their wide receivers are good. Hunter and J. Michael Sturdivant are both very talented guys. Jay Knott looks like a future NFL guy, but he gets no room to run because the offensive line can't do anything. They've made tons of changes on the offensive line. In fact, none of the current positions on the starting five in the front are the same five that started in the beginning of the season. They've been moving guys around, and injuries. They've had some injuries, but not as many as a lot of teams have had. And then defensively, which is where they've hung their hat since Wilcox has been there, they have a couple of good players, but not great. The scheme is sort of keeping them in games until they played Oregon, that was the first game that the defense really couldn't do anything, and really the first game they got blown out. Because of their defense, they were able to stay in games, but against Oregon, they weren't able to do that at all. Sermon, the coach's son, Jackson Sermon, is a good inside linebacker, but their other three linebackers, the other inside linebacker and two outside backers are mediocre at best, and you need elite guys at that position to have a really good defense. Their safeties are pretty good with Daniel Scott and Craig Woodson. The quarterbacks have been so, not great. They have a true freshman who sort of worked his way into the lineup, who's going to be really good someday because he has good instincts, but he's a freshman now, and that's a tough way to go at the cornerback spot. I think Wilcox does not like to fire assistants, but he's going to have to make a big decision about Bill Musgrave when the season is over, I think. When Musgrave came, everybody thought everything was going to be fixed with the offense. All that NFL experience, 20 years in the NFL as an offensive coordinator at the pro level. You figure this guy is going to be able to do it at Cal. It hasn't happened at all. And it'll be interesting to see what Wilcox does with Musgrave. Like I say, I don't think he's ever fired a guy. He loses his assistants because they go elsewhere, and he sort of waits until they get a good job offer and then sort of says, yeah, okay, I think you better take that job. But I don't know what he's going to do with Musgrave. I don't think he plans on coaching forever. He's in his 60s, so I don't know how much longer he plans to keep coaching. So it'll be interesting to see what Wilcox does. I can't imagine that he can afford to keep Wilcox or to keep Musgrave after this season. The offense has just been terrible. Couple of things. The one thing I understand, well, he was working on an extension at Cal at the time, so it probably been bad for him to bolt at that point. The other thing is, my understanding was that he would have been asked that for the staff there to tell him who his offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator would be, and that's not something a head coach is going to walk into very often. So I think a lot of it had to do with that. And Wilcox, he hasn't proven that he's a great head coach, but he's a really upstanding citizen, and he's not going to leave a situation just to go to another situation, even though it is noticeably better than the one he's at. Sometimes to a fault, his morals get in the way of being a great head coach. I think the assistant coach situation being an example. But I was surprised he didn't take the job anyway. He's not going to get fired. Wilcox isn't going to get fired at Cal for at least a couple more years, especially after turning down the Oregon job and signing a new extension just last year, a couple of weeks after the Oregon thing came down. So they're not going to fire him, but they may encourage him to do something about his assistant coaches. Hard to say. I guess through the air. I mean, the Trojans have a lot of interceptions. I would guess they'll try to over the short middle. I would guess with plays using their wide receivers. And Jaden Ott is a really good receiver, so they'll probably use him a lot. The problem is their offensive line is so poor that they don't give Plummer much time, and Plummer is not a real he's got some mobility, but nothing like the elite quarterbacks in the conference have. So he's been sacked, I guess, 23 times, 26 times, something like that, a lot. So I think they're going to have to go with a lot of short stuff, try going deep periodically on situations where, first down situations where perhaps the pass rush wouldn't be so great. They have receivers that can go up. Plummer has tried a couple of times, even when the guy's perfectly covered, just to put the ball up for Hunter and Sturdivant, and it's worked out pretty well. They usually come down with the ball. So I would guess they would try that a couple of times, even if their guy is covered. I think Plummer might put it up for, on passes that travel 40, 35, 40 feet, 40 yards in the air. Oh, the one that surprised me most was the Colorado game. Losing to Colorado at any site is an embarrassment. Their offense, Colorado has perhaps the best or the worst defense in the country, certainly the worst among a Power 5 team. And they scored 13 points against that team. That's kind of remarkable. The 49 points against Arizona surprised me at the time, although seeing what Arizona has done in the meantime, their defense, they're challenging Colorado for lack of defense. The difference is that Arizona has a pretty good offense too. But the Notre Dame thing didn't surprise me that much. It came right after Notre Dame had lost to Marshall. I guess if it happened now after Notre Dame beat Syracuse, it might surprise me a little bit. But Notre Dame was really struggling at the time. So that didn't surprise me a whole lot. I thought they had a chance. They had a chance in that game. They had on the Hail Mary on the last play, the guy had the ball on his chest for what would have been a tying touchdown, and it rolled off. So I don't think Notre Dame is a great team by any means. They're getting better, clearly, but Cal certainly could have won that game. Until they get some offensive linemen, they're not going to be any good. And they haven't had any really good offensive linemen for a while. They got 2 in the pros now, and neither of them are starters. When they were good, when Cal was good, when Jeff Tedford was the coach, they had outstanding offensive linemen. And you can talk about Rogers and, Marshawn Lynch and all those guys. But the difference was that they had offensive linemen at the time. They had Alex Mack and Todd Stussy and Troy Ozzie, a lot of guys that played in the pros for quite a long time and were good pros. They just haven't had good offensive linemen for quite a while. Whether they have to recruit those guys or develop them, I don't know which way you go, but they just haven't had them. And until they do, they're going to be stuck in this situation. Very conscientious guy, very good defensive coach. Until he finds a guy who can lead the offense or can recruit really good offensive linemen, I think it's going to continue this way. I mean, each year it seems like he's just about to turn the corner, and it never happens. And I think you're starting to wonder whether it's ever going to happen. He's an incredibly moralistic guy. When he loses, it's like he takes losses extremely hard, and he's really he comes to every press conference. He doesn't jump out of press conferences or anything like that. But he's really after the Colorado game, he was a mess. So I don't know whether he can survive much longer. He'll stay on, but I thought after they had that 8-5 season that they were really going to get things going. Just hasn't happened, and I don't see anything changing until they get an offensive coordinator and some offensive linemen to make it happen. I don't think so. I mean, I've seen a lot of things on the betting sites of David Shaw being very high up on coaches that are about to go. They're not going to fire David Shaw. This is Stanford. I mean, they have a different method of measuring success. And Shaw took him to the Rose Bowl a bunch of times. They're not very good right now, granted, but he has had considerable success. If anything, I would say Wilcox is more in jeopardy than Shaw, and I don't think Wilcox is in much jeopardy either. But Stanford's not going to. They're not going to fire David Shaw. The only way he would go is if he says, "Okay, I've had enough and I'm leaving." But I don't think that's going to happen either.
Matt, I'm out of questions. Anything else? Oh, you got another one here. Let's see.
The Stanford Cal game is going to be the 40th anniversary of the play. So that's right. That'll be the highlight of that confrontation. I don't even know. I'm getting to the point now where a lot of people that are reporters now don't even remember the play. So it's not even that big a deal to a lot of people now. Well, Stanford is different. Stanford has a really hard time getting guys in. They don't lose too many guys on the transfer portal except as grad transfers. And Cal, I think it's discouraged. I don't think Wilcox wants to have transfers. They'll get it. They'll try to get a transfer for a specific situation. Obviously, they needed a quarterback, so they had to go out and get a quarterback, and they got one who was at Purdue and got replaced as the starter at Purdue. So it tells you something about what they got there. I think Wilcox is just reluctant to go the transfer route for a lot of guys. I think Stanford is closer. They've shown that they can do it at a very high level. The last couple of years have been bad, but they've had some really good recruiting seasons. And the problem, of course, with Stanford, is, like we say, is the transfer situation. They're not going to get transfers very often. And I don't know. It's too early in the transfer system of what it's been 2 or 3 years now that it's been going on to really tell the complete impact of it. I mean, Lincoln Riley is certainly making good use of it. But I think Stanford can get back, maybe not to where they were, but I think they can get back to being a challenger for the Pac-12 championship. Cal, I don't know. They just seem to be stuck in neutral. The recruiting is always so-so. They're looking for a specific kind of guy. I mean, Oregon State does that too, and they've been doing pretty good. Oregon State looks for a particular kind of guy, and they find a guy that fits their system, and Jonathan Smith makes it work. So I don't see why Cal can't do the same kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know if it's just as simple as getting a good offensive coordinator, but at this point, it sort of seems that way. Well, let's see. How does it feel today? I don't know. I came to California that year, and so I wasn't covering the big game that year. So I came to California just after that. But it's still a remarkable play. I still think it's the most impressive, amazing play in college football history, and there have been quite a few. Just the repercussions of it. John Elway that was a great game before that play. Elway pulled off some fourth down passes, and if they win that game, they're going to a bowl game. And in fact, the bowl game guy was on the phone at the time when the kickoff is going off. And he says, "Okay, we just about got Stanford." And then there's this long pause that the guy at the other end didn't know what was going on. He goes, "We got some funny business going on here." And so, it ended up costing Stanford a bowl game. And Elway for a long time wouldn't talk about it and, talk about how it ruined his life. And there's all kinds of stories about the Stanford president going into the Stanford locker room afterwards and says, "Oh, don't take your uniform off yet. We're going to have to go back out there. They can't do that to us." There's, stories about the Stanford head coach going into the referee's locker room afterward and demanding that they go back out in the field. All kinds of weird stuff that a lot of people never noticed. But the trombone player is still in the Bay Area. He's a Tech guy, Gary Terrell. And he follows me on Twitter, so I still connect with him periodically.